I never thought that I would ever have to make a video like this. And this is definitely going to be the hardest video that I've ever had to make. If you haven't heard, my husband, Landon Clifford, has passed away. It took a while for me to obviously get over the initial shock, which I still feel like I'm in shock, and to just gather my feelings and my thoughts, and to feel like I'm ready to tell his story, because it's a very important story to be told, and it is my job to tell it, but it's not an easy story to tell at all. Before you watch this video, I want you to know that this is going to be very hard to hear. If you are easily triggered, I wouldn't watch this video. Even if you're not easily triggered, if you think this video might affect you in a negative way, I don't think you should watch it. We're going to be talking about addiction and suicide and depression, and these are very heavy topics. If you are of a young age, I highly recommend having a parent watch this video first and then asking them if they think it's okay for you to watch it. And if they say yes, maybe watching it with them so you can talk with them about it and they can kind of talk you through some of the more confusing, difficult questions that you might have. If you are younger, please do not watch this without parental supervision, and I ask that they watch it all the way through before making a decision on whether or not you should watch it. Landon has always had his issues mentally. He's someone that is not as open about it. I share everything with you guys, and I've always been very open about my struggles with depression and anxiety, and that's just me. I get a lot of comfort in talking to you guys about those kinds of things. One, knowing that there's so many people out there who love me and support me, and to just know that it's helping someone else who might go through the same thing, or at least a similar thing, and for that person to be able to relate and to feel like they're not alone. Landon is a very quiet, secretive person, especially when it comes to sharing deep emotional things with the world. He would hardly share them with me or his family or his friends, let alone everyone, which is fine. You don't have to share everything with everyone if you don't want to. So I always did my best to try and respect that. So behind the scenes, he was always just kind of going through his own stuff that he just didn't really feel comfortable with sharing. And he has had mental health issues for as long as I have known him. He suffered from anxiety and depression. He has ADHD, which he has had since he was a little boy. So his whole life, he's always just kind of struggled with his emotions and just the way his brain was wired. Around the time that I got pregnant with Delilah, he kind of started falling into a depression. I don't think the two are correlated whatsoever. We tried for Delilah. She wasn't an accident, and we both came to the mutual decision that we wanted another baby at that time. But there was other things going on with our lives that we didn't really talk about. Many factors just kind of contributed to the fact that his mental health just wasn't really great at the time. So he went to see a psychiatrist. It's not his first time visiting a psychiatrist. When he was younger, all throughout elementary school and middle school, he took ADHD medication. He stopped taking it in high school. He just didn't really like the way it felt. But he was starting school online, so he wanted to get back on that. And then he also decided that it would be a good idea to start on antidepressants and maybe something to help with his anxiety. So he went to the psychiatrist and kind of explained his issues he was having. You know, I'm having panic attacks, I'm depressed, and I have trouble focusing. So his doctor prescribed him ADHD medication, antidepressants, and an anti-anxiety medication. He did the right thing. You know, when you're going through something, everyone tells you, like, find help, go seek help. It can be really hard when you're struggling with mental health issues to make that step and to go get help. But he did, and he did the right thing. And it hurts a lot because his intentions were so pure. He just wanted help. He just wanted to get better, and he just got worse. The anti-anxiety medication that was prescribed to him was for when he was having a panic attack. It wasn't something he took daily. He was only supposed to take it when there was no other way for him to calm down in the middle of a panic attack. But they were highly addictive because when you have anxiety and you have all these thoughts kind of going through your head all the time, you know, you'll do anything to shut those thoughts off. And so it's very easy to become addicted to anti-anxiety medication. You crave to just not have to worry about things for just a second, just to have that peace. And then at the same time, the ADHD medication was kind of addictive because you take it and you have all this energy to do all the things you need to do in your day. So he'd take it and he'd clean the house and he'd be kind of manic, and when he was distracted with all these little things that he was now able to focus on, it kind of took away from his anxious and depressing thoughts, and it just kind of distracts you from your issues and makes you focus on other things. So he got into this pattern of waking up in the morning and taking his ADHD medication to wake him up, and he felt awake and ready for the day, and he got a ton of stuff done during the day and felt really good and happy and productive. But another thing about ADHD medication is it can kind of have some side effects when it starts to wear off, and you know, you kind of come down from that high and you're just kind of depressed and sad and kind of the opposite. You have no motivation, and it just kind of really hits you hard when your medicine wears off. But then he had his anti-anxiety medication, so it was like, okay, well, I'm not feeling great, let me take this medicine to kind of calm myself down, and it makes you sleepy and drowsy, so he'd take that to relax and be able to get to sleep. Because another thing that the ADHD medication affected was being able to sleep. It makes you awake and it stays in your system for a while, so when you do finally lay down to get to bed, you're physically exhausted, your body is really tired from everything you did that day, but your brain is still going really fast. So it was kind of a lethal mixture of these two very strong, heavy drugs, both very addicting, and he just kind of fell into a hole. He needed the uppers to get up in the morning and the downers to slow down at night. And the more downers he took at night, the more uppers he needed to wake himself up. And the more uppers he took during the day, the more downers he needed to go to bed. So it was a very, very vicious cycle, and he just kept taking more and more and more and needing more for his body to feel the effects. And it was very unhealthy. His ADHD medication also made him lose a lot of weight. You don't really get very hungry when you take that. Your appetite really slows down, so he really wasn't eating very much and was just really sickly and just not doing well. And for a while, I wasn't even aware that he was abusing his medications. I thought, you know, the doctor gave that to him. Like, it can't hurt. Why would a doctor prescribe that if it was bad for him? But as things progressed and I really started to see, and then at that point ask him, like, how much are you taking of this? I realized that he had a problem. But at that point, he was so far into it that it was really hard to just stop. He depended on those drugs to function. He would try to stop, but he would wake up and he would feel like crap and super groggy, and he would spend hours trying to fall asleep at night. And no matter how many times he tried fixing it on his own, it never worked. All the while, I'm going through pregnancy. Towards the end of my pregnancy, I started to go through depression, which hadn't been a problem for me for many, many years. It's been about 5 years since I dealt with that, but that started to kind of creep back in. It just became really hard for us to function in our day-to-day lives. I was super pregnant and depressed and didn't want to get out of bed, and Landon was obviously going through his struggles and withdrawals and getting back on the drugs and trying to get off. It was just a lot at once. And then Delilah was born, and for a little while, We were both really happy, and it was almost like a light at the end of the tunnel. We'd been struggling for a while, and we just got to feel the bliss of having a new baby. But after bringing her home and now having 2 kids and dealing with that adjustment, it really hit us hard, and it was like almost worse than it was before. So at that point, I made the decision to take a break from YouTube. I felt that there was no way for us to get the help we need and get better while trying to make videos and be happy, and it was just mentally exhausting filming videos. First of all, knowing that honestly behind the scenes we were struggling. Not to say that it was all fake, but there was times where we had to put on a happy face. We did only show the good parts, which at the time it didn't really seem like there was many good parts, but we just focused on Colette and just being the best we can for her and doing the best we can to film videos and provide for our family and keep you guys in the loop. But it hit a point where we couldn't do that anymore. We both needed real help, and I just knew that if we were gonna get it, we couldn't continue to do YouTube during that time. So I announced that I was taking a mental health break. Like I said, Landon isn't one to really share that kind of stuff with everyone, so I just kind of put it on me, which I was having my issues, but it was really Landon as well. So Landon went up to Dallas to be with his parents during that time and to just really focus on himself and his mental health and getting clean off the drugs and just completely wiping it out of his system, which is really, really hard. And you deal with withdrawals, and he just needed to be around family at that time. Being around the kids while trying to deal with what he was dealing with just wasn't productive. So I took the kids to Florida because, with a brand new baby, I was only 1 month postpartum. Taking care of them by myself wasn't the best option for me. I needed to be around family and get help with the kids because I was also dealing with my issues. So he was working on his mental health in Dallas with his family. I was with my family working on my mental health, and it was really hard. We missed each other a lot. We talked to each other every day. We called each other, but we just knew it was what was best for the both of us and what we needed. And I slowly started to see him just doing a lot better, having a lot better attitude about things. And he seemed to be doing really well in Dallas with his family. And when we felt like we were ready, we went back to Austin together, back to our home. I was feeling a lot better as far as, postpartum depression goes. I was eating really well. I was cooking for us every night. Before we were too depressed to even cook, we would order DoorDash a lot of the time. But I was cooking and being healthy and working out and drinking water and just developing good habits that made me feel a lot better. And for a while, Landon was a part of that too. We would take the girls to the park every day. We would talk to each other a lot more, spending a lot less time on our phones. We were both going to therapy and journaling, and it really seemed like things were getting a lot better. He had not taken any kind of drugs since he went to Dallas. He called his psychiatrist and told him, look, I'm addicted to these. I need you to stop prescribing it to me. The only thing he stayed on was the antidepressant. So he was no longer on either of his ADHD medication or his anxiety medication. And he was already just looking a lot better physically and eating more. And it just really seemed like things were looking up, and we were just about ready to get back into our normal routine and filming videos again. And then on August 13th, I went out with a friend for lunch. So he was kind of left alone with the girls for a little bit that day. I just went shopping with my friend. I came back home and I bought him a ton of shirts, and I was showing him all the shirts I bought for him, and he seemed like he was having a good day, and he was excited for me to be back home and to hang out with him. And so I cooked dinner and we ate, and we were just having our normal night routine. We put Colette to bed together. We read her a book, and then we went to our room and we were just kind of talking, and I could tell that something was wrong. And he said he was sorry for everything he put me through. It was really hard on me when I was pregnant, and he was heavy in his addiction, and he just really wasn't himself during that time, and he was just apologizing to me for everything, and I could just tell he was putting a lot of blame on himself. And I talked to him, and I told him that I loved him and that I forgave him, and things are different now, and we're on a new path. And I gave him a hug and a kiss and told him I love him and that it's okay, and that no matter what he ever did, I would always love him and be here for him. And there's nothing that he could do to make me stop loving him. And after that, he seemed okay, and I thought I helped, and we just kind of continued on with our night. And he said he was going to have a bath, which he does every night before bed, and he knew that I wouldn't question it, you know? So he leaves the room, and I'm just kind of sitting there waiting for him to get out. About 30 minutes later, I kind of hear Colette start to wake up and toss around. So I go to her room and I check on her, and I open the door and I tell her, go back to bed. And then I'm like laying and spin in the bath for a while. I'm going to check on him. And I go to the bathroom, and the bath is empty. It didn't look like he had a bath whatsoever. And so I checked all the rooms. He wasn't in the bathroom. I checked Colette's room again because maybe, he was in there with her snuggling, because he does that. He'll go in her room and just snuggle with her sometimes. And I thought maybe I just missed it and I didn't see him in there, but I checked and he wasn't there. And our house is pretty small. I checked everywhere he could be. And then I went into the garage. And when I opened the garage, I saw him, he had hung himself, and he didn't look alive. He was very pale, and I was in so much shock, and it took me a second to realize that it was actually happening. And I ran to the kitchen, and I grabbed a knife, and I came back, and I cut him down. And I called 911, and I told them where I was and what happened. And I laid him down, and I checked if he had a pulse, and he didn't. And there was just nothing there at all. He was not there. He was dead. I knew at that moment that he was gone. There is no words to describe how I felt at that time. Very few people will ever understand. And if you do understand what that is like, I'm sorry to you, because no one should have to experience that. And then the ambulance got there, and a police officer escorted me out of the garage and told me that I shouldn't be in there. And then Colette was up again, and she was banging on her door and screaming, and Delilah started crying. I was shaking, and there was nothing I could do. I felt so helpless. And I started making calls because I knew all of our family was far, and they just need to get there as soon as possible. So I called my parents, and I called his parents. It didn't feel real until I called his mom, and I heard the terror in her voice as I told her what happened. And she asked me if he's dead. And I said, I don't know. They're working on him, but I don't know. And she was screaming and crying. And then an EMT comes in and tells me that he has a pulse. They got a pulse back, and they were taking him to the hospital. And then I called a friend to come over and watch the kids so I can go to the hospital. It felt like it took hours for them to come. In reality, it probably wasn't that long, but I sat there waiting for them so I can go and be with him. And they finally got there, and I got a ride to the hospital. And my friend drove me to the hospital, and he was saying, there's lots of programs for him for when he wakes up, and we're gonna be with you through all this, and he'll be okay. And he kept talking about when he wakes up, and I'm just like, he's dead. Like, I saw him, like, he's not waking up. I got to the hospital, and they wouldn't let me see him at first. And his doctor came in and explained, very particular with the words he chose to use, not to give me false hope, but not to tell me that he was gone yet. And they had an investigator talk to me, and just, they were questioning me about how it all went down. And then I saw him. To see him with a tube down his throat and all these wires and IVs. It's not the way you want to see someone you love. But at least he looked more alive. And he looked like my Landon. And he was warm. He wasn't just cold and pale. I just held his hand. And then they took him up to his hospital room in the ICU. And I was just numb. They had me in the waiting room while they got him set up in there. And I was just sitting there just staring at the floor. And I was just in such disbelief. And then my brain started going to places like, if I would have got up and checked on him a little bit sooner, maybe he'd be okay. And just all the what ifs of how it could have gone differently. And I told myself, everyone's gonna be so mad at me, because I felt like it was my fault. And I was so sure that his parents were gonna come in and yell at me and be mad at me for not checking on him sooner. And I just put so much blame on myself, just thinking about all the ways that the day could have gone differently. And maybe if I didn't go out with my friend that day, or maybe if I had talked to him a little bit longer when he was telling me how sorry he was for everything. And then his parents got there, and I was so nervous. And they just came up and gave me a hug and said, it's gonna be okay. And his mom went back to see him in his hospital room, and she wasn't there for very long. She came back and she said she just couldn't do it. You know, it was really hard to see. And then his dad got there. I've never seen his dad cry. And just seeing him break down was so hard. And all these emotions just kept coming in waves, for being in a state of shock and just staring off and disassociating myself from reality, and snapping back and realizing the situation and that it's real and that this isn't a dream, and just seeing everyone crying. I went back in the room with him, and I was holding his hand, and he would squeeze it, and then his eyes would flutter open just for a second, and it gave me a lot of hope, because, you know, he's moving, he's opening his eyes. And I was talking to him, and I was saying, Landon, open your eyes, like, I'm right here, it's me, it's Cameron, squeeze my hand. And at that point I thought for a second, maybe he's not gone, and maybe he's gonna wake up. And then the doctor sits us down and says that they did an MRI, and his brain didn't look severely damaged, but they said that it was likely just because they did it so early, right after it happened, that his brain is still in the process of shutting down. And the fact that he was moving just meant that his neurons were all just kind of firing off at once before they just completely died out. So it wasn't really him there, it was just his body having a reaction. Doctors have a certain way, though, of wording things where they won't really give you an answer. So he told us all that, but at the same time, he kind of worded it in a way that it's very much, you know, a possibility, and they're unsure, and they're gonna have to wait and see. But at that point, I think we all kind of knew. And I just remember feeling that hope when I thought for a second that he might be okay. I wish I could go back to when I felt hope. I wish I could go back to just an hour earlier before he told us that I thought it was a good sign, and I thought it meant he was waking up. Ignorance is bliss, I guess. And to at least feel a little bit of hope is all I needed at that time. And then I just had none. And everyone around me and my family and his family, they were all kind of like, let's pray, like, let's have hope. There's hope. And I just knew that there wasn't any hope of him waking up. I found him and he was dead. And you don't really come back from that. After your brain goes so long without oxygen, I knew that he was gone. And it was really hard hearing everyone say, I'm praying and he's gonna wake up, have faith, he's gonna wake up. Because the last thing I wanted was to get my hopes up again, just to be crushed. So from then on out, I just kind of started accepting it. I started mourning him and, having those thoughts like he was actually gone. Just really trying to wrap my head around all of it. 1 second he's there, the next he's in a hospital bed. I had to leave the hospital eventually, take a shower, and check on the girls, and just do something other than sitting in the waiting room crying. But I couldn't go back to the house. It was so hard. And I had to go back to pack a bag. And every single thing I owned, everything we owned, it just had a memory attached to it. And it just all reminded me of him. And I remember when we bought that together, and he loved that shirt, and it was just so hard going in there. And then the thought of even walking by the garage door. But I got my stuff, and I went to a hotel, and I stayed there for that week. And then on August 18th, after just kind of waiting around for days to hear a final answer, we got it. And there was only one person allowed in the hospital room at a time, and I just happened to be the one in there with him when the doctor came in. And he sat me down. He said they ran all the tests, and they tested his brain function and his brain waves and his MRI again. And at 2:22, they pronounced him brain dead. And my heart just sank. And I knew pretty much that whole week that was going to happen at some point. But to actually hear it and know it, it was really hard. And so I called his parents up and his brother, and they came up, and I told them that he was gone. And we all just cried over him and prayed and talked to him, even though he wasn't really there. And then, after we all kind of had a second with him, we walk outside, and someone stops me and says, "We need to talk with you. Come to this room." And they set us up in a conference room, and they said Landon was registered to donate his organs. And they read me off the list of all the organs that he chose to donate, and he donated everything. He wanted to save as many people as possible, and I wasn't surprised to hear that he was an organ donor. He is just such a compassionate, loving, caring person, and he always put others above himself. So even in death, he was caring about other people. And so they explained that they would spend the next 24 hours trying to gather information on all of his organs and finding recipients, and that the next day he would have a surgery where they would cut off his life support and then harvest his organs. So his family said goodbye to him that day. They had to head back to Dallas to start making funeral arrangements. So they said their goodbyes and they left. And then the next morning before his surgery, I went up there and I said my final goodbyes to him. And it was so hard because, like I said, he was warm and his chest was moving and he was breathing. Even though it was on machine, he was breathing and he looked alive, even though he wasn't. And it was really hard to see him with all the tubes and everything. So I just held him And I closed my eyes so I wouldn't have to see him like that, and I just thought about him as the happy Landon that I know, with this smile and those dimples. And I just hugged him, and I just told him how much I loved him. And then I'd stop hugging him, and then I'd hug him again, because I knew eventually it would have to be the last one. I had to say goodbye at some point. I couldn't just hug him forever. And so I would just hug him, and then I'd be like, okay, it's time to go. This is it. But then I couldn't, and I turned around, and I hugged him again and again. And then eventually it was the last one, and I left. And that's the last time I saw him. And as much as I knew he wasn't really there, his body was there. And that was the smile I fell in love with, and the hands I held, and the hair that I would run my fingers through, and the forehead that I would kiss, and the eyes that I would stare into. And that's the man I fell in love with, and the last time I would see him. And all throughout his stay at the hospital, there was little signs of him and little things that just reminded me that he was there, even though he wasn't. I think his spirit was still there. We got married on the 22nd of June, and he was in room 22, and they announced him brain dead at 2:22, so that number just kind of kept popping up, and I didn't really know what to make of it, but it just felt like a sign. But I walked away from room 22. It was the hardest goodbye I've ever had to say. When something like this happens, there's a lot of questions that will never be answered. Everyone asks why. I looked for a note. There was no note, no explanation, but I know him very well. And so after having a lot of time to think about it and process it, I've been able to kind of piece it together in my head. And I'll never truly know the answer, but I know Landon, and I know he was not thinking rationally. He's a very impulsive person, he always has been, and he does things without thinking. And I think he felt guilty about how everything has gone for the past year, and I think he just felt like a burden, and like we'd be better off without him, which is so far from the truth. And I wish he would have known that. I'm heartbroken. Colette is confused. There is no way that we're better off without him. I think he just felt like a burden though, and like he was holding me back from being happy, which wasn't true. He had a suicidal thought. I think he convinced himself that that's what needed to happen, and he just said, Landon, if you don't just do it, you never will. You're gonna talk yourself out of it. You can't think about it another second. You just need to do it. And he did. And he didn't think about it, because I know that if he would have thought about it, he would have thought about the fact that I'd be the one to find him. And he would have thought about all the hurt he would cause me. And he would have thought about his daughters growing up without him. And he would have thought about everyone who would be hurt by this. And he wouldn't have done it if he would have thought about it more. Because he is such a compassionate, loving person. And he cares about everyone else before himself. And the last thing he would want is for any of us to feel this way. And if he knew everything that would follow after he did what he did, he wouldn't have. And that's why I'm here to tell his story, because there are so many people out there who need to hear about what comes after. They think, you know, if I do it, if I kill myself, I won't have to deal with all that. It's not my problem. And a lot of people think that way. But I know deep down that you care about your loved ones. And I know Landon did. And you need to think about that before you do it. Think about who's going to have to find you. Think about everyone who loves you. And not just that, oh yeah, they'd miss me. No, they'd be heartbroken. They would cry themselves to sleep. You need to think about that. It's easier to just not, and to just do what he did, and do it before you can stop yourself, before you can go there, before you can think those thoughts. And I think he knew deep down that if he went there and if he thought about that he wouldn't do it. And he was just in such a dark place that he was so convinced that it's what needed to happen. He just had so much more life to live. He had so much ahead of him. And now, every time that I experience learning something new, or the next holiday, or the next sunset, or the next beautiful thing in life, I'm gonna be thinking, he should be here to see that. And you need to think about the fact that if you do go through with it, there's so many beautiful things in life that you're gonna miss. All I ask of you is that you just think twice. I know in the moment life can just seem so overwhelming and like it's the only solution, but it's not. Other solutions might seem harder, but suicide is a permanent solution to a temporary problem. You will get through it, and you will be happy one day, and it is never, ever, ever the right answer. I hope his story sticks with you. I hope the story of all that he's left behind sticks with you, and I hope that you remember it in a time of need. Thank you for all the support and love during this time. It means a lot to see all the people who loved him, and I know that he's looking down from heaven and he sees the love, and he feels the love. If you love someone, let them know. Hug them a little tighter for me. Cherish them, because life is so short and you never know what can happen. And just be grateful for what you have, because I would give anything to be able to hug Landon right now. Life is just so precious. I love you guys. Thank you. And his legacy will live on, and his story will be heard.